Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is always a mark of the season, is when I take up the sweet peas that have been actually really good this year. We've got a lot of flowers, a lot of fragrance, and a lot of pleasure. But their time has come, and you can see that the seed pods are forming. And if you wanted to keep the seed, then just leave everything here until the seeds get really dry and start to open, and then gather them up, and so they've ripened properly. But I want to clear this, and that just means cutting them down and taking them to the compost heap. And as I cut, I notice that in here is a really healthy tomato plant. Look at that, growing out of the compost. Couldn't be healthier if I'd lavished all the love and horticultural skill and wizardry known to man. Right, let's take this down. All these three wigwams are a variety called Matucana, chosen because, as well as looking great and making a wonderful cut flower, has fabulous fragrance. And fragrance is the key thing in this part of the garden. So now the sweet peas are gone, I've got to think what I'm going to replace them with to keep fragrance going throughout the winter months. Obviously much more tricky than in the summer. Far fewer plants have winter fragrance, but there are some. Haven't yet decided what I'm going to put there, but that will come in the next few weeks. Now, coming up on today's programme, Sue visits a grower who is raising plants specifically to create stunning dried flower displays.
This really is a plant picker's paradise.
We always need to have a good range of kind of the showstoppers, the pizzazz flowers that are all the glitz and the glamour of the colour.
And looking at this, it's like having a whole garden in a frame.
We meet a gardener who has returned to his family home and transformed the garden based upon his love for the surrounding landscape.
You see the abundance in there and the changes throughout the seasons. Spending a lot of time outside, I think you sort of absorb what's out in nature and you can interpret it in your own garden, but in your own way.
Joe visits a couple who discovered that their garden had far more to it than they had ever expected when they moved into their new home.
We sort of battled our way through this impenetrable undergrowth and then realised we were in a walled garden. And being sort of quite innocent about these things, we thought, well, we can restore that. Take about 10 years, 25 years later.
And I'll be planting some strawberry plants in my strawberry patch. I don't need an apple. Earlier this spring, I made these 4 beds specifically for cut flowers. Now, as it happens, they can look quite good too. I think these dahlias look fantastic. I'm very happy with them. And they have looked great for months and months. So those will keep going until the first frost. But now we've got an empty bed here, I want to start preparing for next year, which is why I've got these seeds. Now, these are hardy annuals, which means that they're tough. So we've got nigella, we've got cerinthe, I've got cornflowers. All these are plants that will look great, both in a border and in a vase, but by sowing them here, it means they're dedicated for the house. And if they look good, then that's a benefit. Right, I'm going to start with a nigella. This is Miss Jekyll, lovely pale blue. And with hardy annuals, nothing could be simpler. Simply make a little groove, like that, and I've added some sieved compost to the soil. This has been producing cut flowers all summer, so therefore it has taken nutrients from the soil, so you do need to give something back. And just the same as sowing vegetables, there's no virtue in sowing too thick. What we want are nice, strong plants that will give us a succession of flowers with strong stems. And by sowing them now, they should start flowering at least 3 or 4 weeks earlier than those that I sow next spring. I'm going to continue the blue theme with some cornflowers. Now this is Blue Boy, and it's got a lovely sort of mauvey cast to it. And then just very simply run my fingers either side of the drill, which will force the soil back over it and cover them up. And it's as easy as that. Water these. Having watered them, don't let them dry out. They should germinate quite quickly, and once they get a few inches tall, they won't do much. But underneath, they'll have a good root system, and that will give us an early start next spring. And keep them weed-free, that is important, so that they're not competing for nutrients or moisture. Now, cut flowers actually give a really good return on space. You don't need a big bed. You can grow them in a container, you can grow them in a window box, and it is extraordinary how many flowers they will give you for your home. And this July, Sue went to visit a grower, actually not so far from here, in Herefordshire, who's growing cut flowers on quite a big scale. And what she does with them is fascinating.
There's nothing lovelier than a garden full of flowers, and I like to think of creative ideas for them. Putting them in vases and filling my house full of colour and scent, making posies and even using some for culinary delights. Today I'm excited to meet a fellow enthusiast. Leyla Robinson has a garden full of cut flowers in every shape, size and hue. 10 years ago, she decided she could be creative with them, and she started drying them for flower arrangements with a distinctly modern twist. This really is a plant picker's paradise. Do these plants need any special growing conditions?
I mean, my growing conditions aren't ideal here, but generally all of these flowers are sun lovers and they like a good bit of sun and some nice soil to live in, and then they'll be happy.
And there's a huge range here, so how do you decide what you need to grow?
Well, I have to grow all of the different textures that I would use in a design. For a background, I might want more neutral colours, and then I have my fillers that are the fluffy things that give it more body. I always need to have a good range of kind of the showstoppers, the pizzazz flowers that are all the glitz and the glamour of the colour.
Well, you've certainly got a lot to choose from, haven't you?
Certainly have.
You have. Straw flowers. Now, these feel dry already before you even start. They make a lovely crinkly noise, don't they? Are they easy to grow?
They are fairly easy to grow, yes. I tend to sow mine on the windowsill in February when it's really cold to get enough growing season ahead of me. And the other thing that can really be helpful is after a few weeks of planting them out, if you pinch out the growing tips, it'll encourage those side branches and long stems that are really great for picking later on.
Are there different picking times for different plants?
Well, there is, and for these, if you want an open flower, then you pick it when you can see the centre, like this one.
Yeah.
Or you can pick it just as the centre's starting to show, and it will continue to open up as you dry it. But, you know, as I said, it's quite nice to have some buds too, and they keep their colour beautifully.
So definitely one for the starter grower.
Yes, I definitely think if you've got a few of these, you can pretty much make anything look fabulous.
Wow. This is a delightful plant combination. How would you use these in your displays?
So these pocostatis and these paper daisies here, they're great for the show-stopping flowers where you can have them en masse and you can really make them a focal point of design. But they also produce a brilliant way of pulling a design together at the end, and you might just want a pink sort of splash of colour or a wiggle, a streak, and it will just make that design come together and be completed.
And how would you know when to pick these?
If you pick them too soon, they would be floppy. This stem here would just literally go floppy and it wouldn't dry properly at all. Whereas if you wait till they open and you can see these little flowers have opened a lot more, that is so much more rigid now. That is at the perfect point to pick and it will dry pretty much like it looks on the plant.
I can see you're growing Thalaspi, and you're probably growing them for the seed heads, am I right?
You're totally right, and this is a really wonderful type of cress, and it's got these beautiful little textural seed pods that form as the flowers die off. And yeah, it's an absolute brilliant filler plant or a background plant for a design.
And when's the best time to harvest seed heads?
Well, with these, once these little flowers have all turned into seeds, and while it's still green, that's the moment that you'll pick them.
And you do that with poppies and nigella seed heads as well, don't
Yes,
you?
so a lot of things, you pick them as soon as they've formed their seed head, but not when they've completely dried on the plant. You do the drying in the drying room, and that way they retain their colour.
Lovely. As well as using garden favourites like echinops and larkspur, and different grasses like bunnytails, Leyla likes to throw in the unexpected. This grass, millet, gives movement to an arrangement. But what I really love is how she includes plants for free. Hedgerow plants that appear at the edges of her garden, like buttercups. Once picked, there's quite a bit of preparation to do before the flowers can be arranged, and this is where all the magic happens. Everything here is sort of heads down. Why is that?
Well, it's basically so that these heads dry with a nice straight stem so that they're easy to work with afterwards.
How can you tell when they're absolutely dry?
Well, the very same thing as I'm doing here, you can see that that's still quite bendy. And so when it's completely dry, that will be really nice and rigid. So that's the beauty of hanging them like this, as they dry beautifully straight for working with later. It's really important to get all of that moisture out so that you can store it and it won't go mouldy when it's in storage.
How do you maintain their colour, once you've dried them?
Once they're absolutely bone dry, the best idea for the longest life is to put them in somewhere that's quite dark, because that way the sun doesn't bleach the colour away.
Can I have a go at creating an artistic piece?
Absolutely. Shall we go and have a look and
Yes.
you can make some choices?
We're making a panel constructed of willow and chicken wire. Let the fun begin.
So the first thing that we'd start off with, that I'd recommend, is sticking with neutral colours. Grasses are great for this. And you want the long stems
Something like this.
to go at the back of your design so that you can then layer on top of them.
Right, I see. So this is a lovely wheat grass.
And you thread it through
Thread it
and weave it
through.
through.
That's it. And I suppose you need a bit of a cluster of them.
Well, yeah, I think it's quite nice to try and emulate how you would find these things growing in nature. So they might be in a cluster.
So this is Thespi, isn't it, that we saw earlier on?
Yes.
This is rather beautiful, isn't it? And rather sort of ethereal. These buttercups are being a bit naughty,
Well, they actually are naughty. They're quite characterful little creatures.
but they are so lovely. You have to have them, I think. Gonna get a little bunny tail in here because I absolutely love them. You need the tactile as well as the crispy.
So these last flowers that we're putting in, these are our sparkle flowers that are going to make our designs. In my case, it's going to make it really pop because I've got blue against all these bright colours. But you've got that lovely dahlia, which is going to...
Yes, it's going to be a nice sort of centrepiece, and it's got a yellow centre, so it's going to tie in with the colours. Gardening is a lot of hard work, from nurturing the seeds to growing the plants. And looking at this, it's like having a whole garden in a frame. Thank you, Leyla.
It's been an absolute pleasure to spend the day with you today doing this. It's been really great fun.
I suppose the great thing about dried flowers is you have all the beauty of the growing fresh flower, and then it carries on into another life, which is almost like a library of summer. It's something I've never really got engaged with, but seeing that, it certainly does make me want to try. Now, I'm planting camassias in here, and I have to say, it's making me puffed because the ground is still really hard. It's been raining here at Longmeadow for the last 2 days, really heavily. The first heavy rain we've had for weeks and weeks, and I thought the ground would be softened. The top inches, but down below, it's really dry. And this is always one of the problems of planting bulbs in September, because it's by far the best time to do it. Gets them in the ground, the roots can start growing, it's ideal. But the ground is often so hard. However, I'm giving it a go. And this is Camassia cussicii. It's one of my favorites. It's got a pale blue colour and these bright yellow stamens. And it flowers a little bit later than some of the earlier camassias. And they're wonderful. And the thing about camassias is they like damp ground. They're one of the few bulbs that doesn't need really good drainage. There is one problem with them, and that is that their foliage is very powerful, and in a border, it's quite slow to die back. So nowadays, I only plant them in grass because they're too dominant in a border. But in grass, they look great. Like most bulbs, it has a pointy end and a flatter end. The flatter end is where the roots come from, and the pointy end is where the flower comes from. It's a pointy end up. Camassias, like all bulbs, should be planted at twice their own depth. At this time of year, that's tricky. So as long as it's got some decent soil over the top, it should be okay. It's probably good for some aspects of my body, although it's quite hard work. Now, earlier this summer, we went to Wirksworth in Derbyshire to visit a garden that had been in the same family for over 3 generations. But its current owner went back 6 years ago and took over the garden that his father had made exactly as he'd wanted it, and transformed it to make it his own.
I think what we're trying to create is a type of immersive feel. You can get quite close to the plants and you have to sort of shift them out of the way a little bit as you walk through. I think that gives you a sense of being inside the planting. That's what I really like about it. It's like having that communing with nature experience. My name's Scott Thompson. I live in this house together with my partner Becky, our 2 children and my mum. Do you like that tree over there?
Absolutely lovely, that is. Gives a bit of colour.
This house and garden has been in my family for 88 years. I think the thing about the garden being in my family for 3 generations is it gives you a sense of permanence throughout the whole thing. We live in the Derbyshire Dales, and one of my favourite hobbies over the last 15 years is to be able to get out appreciating nature. You see the abundance in there and the changes throughout the seasons. And what I've wanted to do is to try and recreate some of those changes and some of that abundance in this garden here. The basis of the garden, I suppose, is it's set on a hillside. The garden wraps around the house and kind of envelops it. When I moved back to the garden 6 years ago, my dad had left a really good structural set of bones to the garden, and what I wanted to be able to do was to soften a lot of the edges, making it more of a whole and give it a sense of a more naturalistic type planting. My dad had his vegetable patch here, but what we've wanted to do is to try and create a more unified space with the rest of the garden. I think the Achillea tarmica creates the airiness. It doesn't require any looking after, and it runs around wherever it wants, teaming up with lots of other plants that make their way here on their own. And I think it's that sense of slight randomness that gives it that wonderful looseness. It's very poor soil down the far side of the path, so the eryngium was one of the plants that would happily grow in those types of conditions. It's Eryngium giganteum, and then we've also got Eryngium borgatii, which is this lovely blue one there. The thalictrum is an absolutely stunning plant. As you can see, it's got super strong stems which will last all the way through to next March or April. Flower heads on the top, which waft around in the breeze. You can see through it to the wider landscape. It also looks after itself. I'm a great fan of plants that look after themselves. The less work I tend to have to do, the happier I am. Leaf texture and colour is probably more important to me than flower colour. I like things that are going to do more work because I think a lot of flowering plants are quite ephemeral. I'm tending to sort of concentrate on plants that offer year-round interest. What we've got here is the heart of the garden. We've got a site which acts as a bit of an amphitheatre, really. We've got a very aged wall which runs across the back, and it provides a backdrop for the planting which we've got running down in front of it. What we've needed is some planting that's going to be able to cope with the steepness. We've got some indigenous ferns which run across that bank. What I've tried to create is a selection of textures with all the different greens and different leaf shapes and sizes. The ferns essentially kind of erupt out of one small space. That's probably echoed there by the hydrangea and a fatsia, which is doing a similar thing but with a different shaped leaf. I just planted in whatever subsoil was there. It was just some very thin, sandy subsoil which had kind of like come down from the upper garden over a period of perhaps 100 years. So we've got some geranium running along that bankside there, and of course the roots from the geranium, they're providing some anchorage for the soil which is on the slope. I think the acers give good splashes of colour against the green background. They'll get quite a lot of protection from the wind. They'll like quite a bit of humidity in the area, and I think that's provided by the amphitheatre setting and the other green plants that are growing around it. The garden rises up into quite a steep slope near the top, which used to be a bit more of a fruit orchard, but that's an area that I really wanted to particularly develop myself. What we tried to do is raise the tree canopy from the bottom upwards and improve the bulk in the mids range by putting more shrubs in. We've got the red of the berberis, and that provides some nice bulk for most of the year. Then we've got the viburnum in the background there, which is providing some contrasting shape in the fact that it's more upright than the berberis. And we've also got the honeysuckle running up through the hawthorn, which, if you look here, is echoed with the clematis running over the top of the escallonia. Spending a lot of time outside, I think you sort of absorb what's out in nature and you can interpret it in your own garden, but in your own way. I don't suppose I do stand still. I just love doing stuff. So I perhaps don't sit and enjoy this garden perhaps as much as I could do. But then I think, well, that's maybe something for later years. I could feel me wanting to get up and move around now.
I like the way that Scott has possessed the garden and made it his own, even though he was brought up there and his father lived there and his grandfather. And it's that sense of place that gives a magic. And then the planting makes it personal and idiosyncratic, and all gardens evolve. They all change all the time. And of course, here in the cottage garden, we've been making changes this year, dramatic changes for us, taking out hedges, taking out trees, changing the planting. And it's really interesting to see how that's working out, because it will be slow and it won't always come exactly as I imagine it. But what is happening now is that the roses I planted last winter to extend the flowering season are coming through when last year all the roses would have been finished. The cosmos is still going. And I'm particularly happy with the way that a particular dahlia, Rothsay Reveller, which we've never grown here in the cottage garden before, we always had it in the orchard beds, has really worked well with the various cosmos. And it seems to be very happy. And maybe sometimes it's just a question of moving a plant, finding really where it wants to be. And that can be transformative. Now, still to come on today's programme. Jo visits a walled garden that has been painstakingly restored over 25 years. It's now full of surprises.
What are these? They look like a sort of part of a rocket or something to me.
They are organ pipes from the local church, and we've used a collection of stained glass windows.
Of course you do.
Of course, yes.
And we visit the garden of the food critic Leyla Kazim, whose urban garden is compact but full of a wide range of produce.
This is my sunny border, and I've got about 15 edibles growing in here. I just love that it's absolutely crammed, and there's something tasty growing in every single little patch of space.
What are you doing? But first we're going to visit one of your gardens that belongs to Astrid and Frankie Drummond.
Hi, my name is Astrid, and I helped my mummy make a video about my garden.
Have you got the top of my head?
Yeah, I've got the top of your head and the compost bin and everything. Let's just go, because it's started.
Hello, my name's Frankie. Welcome to my garden. We live in Sheffield. We've lived here for over 3 years, and in that time we've done lots of different things with the garden. So let me show you around. When we arrived in our house 3 years ago, there was a factory next door, which has now been knocked down and replaced by new houses. And we persuaded the builders to keep the fences half height so that there's a bit more of a communal feeling. We had a strip of grass and a bit of paving when we first got here, and we've turned it into a bit more of a mixture. So over here we've got a trampoline, and then around it I've created a bed full of different perennials, annuals. We painted the fence as well to give it a bit more colour, and we've got vegetables growing throughout the garden. And over here we built a little hut for the children.
So you could go towards the broccoli.
This?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So this hut that my partner made, that comes from an old gate, and we repurposed the old gate panels. The children love it, and it makes a little bit of extra shade in the summer as well.
Good.
So my top garden tip for home gardens would probably be use your old fence panels. We had a storm and lots of them came down, and some of them were broken and not really usable again as a fence panel. So what we decided to do was create different things around the garden. The first thing we made about 2 years ago was this compost bin. We chose the triangle shape to fit in this space that we've got that wasn't being used in the garden. We basically just cut down the main fence posts to create a triangle shape. We created another triangle the same size to build the lid, and then the panels we just sort of cut to size and put on top like that. Thank you for visiting my garden. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
I love the trampoline, but instead of just being in grass, to bounce with flowers all around you is a beautiful thing. Now this is a strawberry. It's a variety called Florence. And I've never grown them before. And one of the great things about planting new strawberries, it gives you a chance to try out new varieties. They all have different qualities. Some are early, some are later, some are great for jam. Some don't store at all, but have delicious flavour. Now Florence is a late variety. And that means that it will fruit in July and August rather than June and July. And they are renowned for being particularly tasty. And I'm planting them here, whereas I've got the rest of my strawberries at the other end of this bed, because it's really important for strawberries to keep moving them to fresh ground so they don't accumulate viruses. It's important to give strawberries enough room. So don't plant them any closer than a foot apart, and 18 inches is better if you've got the space. And each of these plants is going to need about a square foot to grow, because for the fruits to ripen properly and not rot in any way, they do need sunshine and air. Right, these now need very little attention. They'll die back, but they'll grow back next spring. I want to water them if it's very dry, keep them weed-free, and then I'll have to mulch them, but I'll do that next spring. And strawberries are easy to grow, so if you've never grown them before, give them a go. And if you have grown them, try different varieties. Explore the full possibilities that you can get from growing your own strawberries that you just cannot possibly achieve when you buy them. Now, last year, Joe went to visit a couple who bought a house knowing there was a garden attached, but not really knowing what was in it. But when they discovered actually what was there, they were astonished.
In 1998, Kay and Patrick McHugh bought this house. Now, along with the stresses and excitement of moving home, there was one element they hadn't quite factored in, and that was going to become a huge part of their lives for the next 25 years. So what was the surprise when you turned up?
Well, it certainly was a surprise because we were coming here to look at a house which was all covered in ivy and very derelict. But then the tenant who was using the land said, oh, come outside. I've got basically a bit of a surprise for you, which was this amazing wall. So we sort of battled our way through this impenetrable undergrowth and then realised we were in a walled garden.
So what was in here? Trees and shrubs and just...
Yeah, this area was mainly, the kitchen garden was mainly covered in brambles, really, and small young trees that are self-seeded everywhere.
And being sort of quite innocent about these things, we thought, well, we can restore that.
Yes.
Take about 10 years,
That is
25 years
amazing,
later.
though. Well, it's a large garden. Better have a look around. We'll catch up with you later, Patrick.
Leave you to it.
So where did it all start?
Well, when we finally managed to clear this garden, because we're organic, to keep it cleared, we just covered it all in agricultural grade black plastic.
All of it?
All of it. So, which was quite an interesting sight.
Yeah.
And then the first actual cultivation was the vegetables. And at that time, I'd found out about raised beds. So we put in 56 raised beds.
56?
Yes.
OK.
Because it's quite a big area, you see.
Well, yeah.
And then if you
Beautifully laid out, though.
Well, that's Patrick, the architectural thing. So he designed this lovely geometric pattern. It's in quarters for crop rotation. And you've got like the ideal width of a raised bed, which I think is about 4 feet.
4 feet exactly.
Yeah, I'm not exactly moving into metric.
1.2 metres.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also the brick paths between them, so easily accessible, so they function well.
So you end up with quite a lot of beds, which is good.
Yeah. But the sweet corn, look at that. Do you eat all this stuff?
We eat a surprisingly large amount. And people often say, you know, are you self-sufficient? But being self-sufficient is quite a difficult thing to be, and so I just tell people who are visiting the garden that we just eat really well. So this is a brassica quarter. It's probably the hardest part of the vegetable garden to deal with all of the different pests that can attack them. The netting that's on there at the moment is purely to keep off the pigeons. We can see them, they're lurking around at the moment. I can see one over there on top of an arch.
They know we're here. But it's very sculptural, actually. It's like an art installation piece at the same time.
Well, thank you very much.
So I guess you have a team of gardeners helping you out.
I wish. No, I don't have a team of gardeners. I am the gardener. It's a case of prioritising what needs doing because it's got to fit around other things as well because I'm still working.
But it's a full... Well, you're still working
Yes,
as well
I am.
on top?
Yeah.
This is not a full-time job.
Well, it kind of is, but you have to add it to the other work that you do.
Well, these borders, I mean, this is absolutely beautiful, isn't it? I call it a mixed border. It works really well, you know, and it's a lovely sort of edge to the whole wall garden as well.
Well,
and covered in bees.
Yes, well, that's the thing. You're drawing them in, and then hopefully they then fly into the rest of the garden and help your fruit and help your vegetables.
pollinate
And
everything.
lots of pollinating going on.
As well as Kay's superhuman gardening effort, the garden is full of reclaimed and recycled treasures built by Patrick.
So, Patrick, you're an architect, but obviously very handy too, because you make a lot of the stuff in the garden here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an architect by day, and weekends and evenings, church gardens takes over and becomes my hobby. And
another full-time job. What are these? They look like a sort of part of a rocket or something to me.
They are organ pipes from the local church. They were taking out their original organ, replacing it, so we got the pipes, and we've used some of them in the house. And a lot of what was left we've used in the garden as trying to introduce an unusual feature, let's say.
Yeah. And what about the polytunnel?
The polytunnel is reworked from an original frame, so we've recladded polycarbonate, and we've used a collection of stained glass windows on the front and rear. We've had those...
Of course you do.
Of course, yes. We gathered them over years and years, and were stored in the shed. We had them for ages and ages, and we just thought, well, this will be absolutely fantastic.
So why are you so into the recycling
I
ethos?
just hate stuff being thrown away. I mean, I work in the building game, and an awful lot of waste of materials in that. So wherever I can, I try and recover things and make use of them if I can here or somewhere else.
You certainly have done here. So what have we got here then? Rainwater harvesting system.
Yes, this is our basic water harvesting system. We've got 4 recycled orange juice containers, so we can take 6,000 litres in total, all collected off the roofs of the buildings, and it's all connected up to some taps around the garden, essential for this size of garden to have.
Fantastic. It must be nice being married to a sort of engineer architect type. I mean, that's not a proposal, by the way. But...
That's right.
This is a garden filled with the unusual and the unexpected. You really get a sense of Patrick and Kay's personalities as you walk around, and right in the heart is one final special spot.
I like it up here. It's like a vantage point across the whole garden, isn't it? Sort of Moroccan theme with the tiles, surrounded with a vineyard.
Well, we always wanted some vines in the garden. The idea here was to design this with a series of raised terraces and to plant vines all around that would give you a sense of enclosure and a lovely place for them to grow.
And they look really healthy. They're obviously loving
They
it.
seem very happy. Yeah.
So from a gardening perspective,
Yeah.
what are your plans for the future here? Or are you done?
I'm planting an edible forest garden, which I started in 2020. And there's all sorts of unusual food and herb plants in there, but they're allowed to grow in the same way you would look at a woodland, so a polyculture of everything.
Another project,
Another
of course.
project. There's always got to be another project.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
just fantastic to see the garden and to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so
very
much.
much for coming.
I love the way that Kay and Patrick were so relaxed about what is an extraordinary garden. The scale of it and the scope and the ambition is outside most people's comprehension, let alone execution. It really is a fantastic story. I'm just adding a little bit of leaf mould to this pot of cyclamen. This is cyclamen persicum, which is one of the most popular bedding plants. They give a really good splash of colour at this time of year, and they will go on flowering well into autumn and even Christmas time. The one thing is they're not fully hardy, but just because they are slightly tender, don't be tempted to give them too much heat if you bring them indoors at all. They will flower longest if they're kept reasonably cool. There are two other types of cyclamen that grow really well in almost any garden, but at different times of year. And at this time of year, cyclamen hederifolium is starting to flower and will continue to flower for the next couple of months. And they're called hederifolium because when they've got leaves, which we've got on these ones here, you can see that they have a distinct resemblance to ivy. And of course, ivy is heterohelix, and that's an ivy leaf we've got there. And immediately you can see why they're called ivy leaf cyclamen. Now these will have started flowering in your garden a few weeks ago and go on flowering for another couple of months. The other type are cyclamen coum. The cyclamen coum don't start flowering till Christmas time and then will flower in very early spring and in late winter. Now, what I do have here are some of the tubers, and now is the time to plant them. The main thing is they are easily outcompeted by cyclamen hederifolium. The two do not sit well together. Cyclamen hederifolium, the one that's flowering now, will always take over because these spread really well by seed, and the seed is transported by ants. The seeds are coated with a sort of sweet, sticky substance that ants love, and ants disperse the seed, and you find them popping up all over the garden. So keep them separate. Have your autumn flowering ones in one place and your spring flowering ones, the coum, in another. And they grow very well in shade. They're wonderful for growing underneath shrubs. Now, as it happens, I want to plant these out because I think cyclamen look best en masse. So I'm going to take these and plant them to bulk out ones that I already have. You can see I've got a few cyclamen hederifolium appearing from around this tree. This is a fastigiate hornbeam that I planted, I think, about 7 years ago. And there are plenty more little seedlings coming up through. Now, when you're planting cyclamen, either coum or hederifolium, you'll see that this is in a lot of compost. But if I take that away, you can see the tuber. Now, this should be buried. Sometimes you see tubers on the top of the soil, and that might make you think that you should plant them like that. You shouldn't. Bury them, and if they rise up and do appear on the top, you either need to mulch them heavily or dig them up and replant them. So we'll just pop that in like that. There we go. And of course this has got foliage which the others haven't, although the other foliage is just beginning to appear, and within a week or two will be there. I'll put the rest of these round the back, and that pink and white will mix in. While I'm doing that, we're going to go to the garden of Leyla Kazim, the renowned food writer and critic. And we went there earlier this summer to see what edible plants she is growing in her West London back garden.
The amount of food I grow in this garden isn't a huge amount, but just the fact that I can grow some things that we can eat is an incredible feeling that does not fade. It's only 5 metres by 7 metres, but if I have learned anything over the years, it's that even if you only have a small amount of outside space, don't be put off by growing stuff, because this space is small and I grow quite a lot. I'm Leyla Kazim, and this is my little patch of paradise in southwest London. When my husband Matt and I moved in 13 years ago, don't think there was a single plant in the whole garden. What we did was we filled the pond, we laid some wildflower turf over that, and then we started to introduce borders, and then all these years later we have this absolutely beautiful space. This is my sunny border, and I've got about 15 edibles growing here, a mixture of annuals and perennials, and I just love that it's absolutely crammed and there's something tasty growing in every single little patch of space. Being half Turkish Cypriot, I have a real affinity for figs, and I grow one here in a pot, and it's pretty old, and for years I didn't really get any ripe fruit, and then actually I picked up a great tip, which was bagging the fruit. And that's about putting a plastic bag around each developing fruit, which acts as a little greenhouse. And so the figs actually ripen within a sort of reasonable time. And I've already eaten a ripe fig this year. Because water does collect in the bags through condensation and probably rain. Just empty it out occasionally and put it back on. And then I'll reuse the same bags each year. I'm very lucky that I get to travel quite a lot, and I like to be influenced by my travels and to see if I can bring a little bit of a country I visited back into the garden. And one part of the world that does this a lot is South America. Of course, South America is known for its sweet potatoes, where the plant is originally from. There's a huge variety, and this year I thought I'm going to see if I can grow sweet potatoes at home, and so they are currently in the border, and you know what, they're actually doing okay. So here I've got the sweet potatoes and also New Zealand yam. The New Zealand yam and the sweet potatoes are actually planted in a mound of earth, and I do that because it makes the harvesting much easier rather than having to dig down. And I also cover the earth with black plastic, which I reuse each year, and that keeps the soil warm, which both these tubers want. And then I use upturned plastic bottles with the bottoms cut off, which directs the water straight to the roots and the tubers. From the looks of the top growth, I might actually get something come November, and that's about the time when I'll harvest, but before then I won't really know. So hopefully it will be a good surprise come autumn. If you've ever been put off by the fact that you don't have access to loads of space, I would advise you to go with pots. It's a great place to start. The two I'm most proud of this year, and which I think are doing particularly well, is the corn and also the beans. I've got 4 or 5 pots of beans, dwarf beans. One of the things I love about growing veg in pots is that it's easier to protect them from pests, and I do this a number of ways, one of them being putting a strip of copper tape around the rim of the pot because slugs and snails don't like to cross copper. And I also use cloches over the young plants in the form of recycled plastic bottles or clear plastic bags. If I'm lucky enough to harvest some corn this year and some beans, and it's looking promising, it's just going to be an incredible feeling, because how amazing to hold a corn cob in your hand and think, I've grown this, and then for it to make part of a delicious meal. It's kind of magic. The raspberries are year in, year out, the most productive and reliable crop in the entire garden. It's only about 7 canes, and it bestows upon me kilograms of raspberries a year. Last year I got 4 kilograms. And if I had one tip to any gardener with a little bit of outside space, it would be to grow raspberries, because they're so easy, and if they're happy, they'll do so well. To make them happy, give them a spot that isn't too sunny. And because mine are right next to the kitchen window, I also don't have a problem with birds. They're like the perfect crop. The smell of a bowl of freshly picked raspberries first thing in the morning, it is one of my favourite garden experiences by far. I think I might just have one now. Even though this is a kind of not huge garden, I really wanted a wildflower meadow, and I like to refer to this meadow as my postage stamp meadow, because it is a small meadow. So the great thing about the meadow is that the flowers in it varies throughout the year, and it starts with a wash of crocuses in early spring, which is great for the pollinators that are out and about early in the year. And then the flowers kind of change throughout the season. We've got things like oxeye daisies, meadow buttercups, common knapweed. I love when the taller flowers, like the wild carrots, are backlit by the sun. I've created a space that welcomes in so much nature that makes me feel great. It's like we're sharing and both enjoying the garden. The meadow is also one of the favourite dozing spots of the local fox. It has flattened some flowers, but I don't mind him being there. We have done so much with this small space, and it's completely unrecognisable to how it was when we first moved in 13 years ago. It went from a barren landscape of just paving to something now that is lush and green and full of wildlife. And it is honestly one of my favourite places to be in the whole world, because that's true.
Leyla is so right. It doesn't matter what you grow, where you grow it, how you grow it. The thrill and magic of sowing a seed, raising the plant, and looking after it to maturity and ripeness, and then harvesting and eating never wears off. In fact, in my experience, it just gets better and better. Now, this is a tray of dwarf beans, which I should have planted out at least a week ago. The reason I didn't was because this bed had the sweet corn in it, and we were still harvesting and eating them until a couple of days ago. And I have to say they were really good this year, absolutely delicious. Having cleared the sweet corn, I've added some compost just to refresh the soil. Now, I sowed them in a seed tray rather than in plugs, and then you just cut them up like brownies and plant out squares of root. And if I take out a wadge like that, there we go, like a piece of cake, I can then break that down into individual plants. And in fact, I'm tempted to plant them as doubles. So I'm going to plant 2 together, side by side. And then again, one in the middle. These beans are pretty late in the season. They are going to give us a harvest well into October and maybe into November. But that's fine, because they are tender and will respond to temperature rather than light. So they'll go on growing perfectly happily as the days get shorter. But the minute the frost comes, that's it, game over. Anyway, I am going to plant out the rest. So while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. If you take cuttings now from Verbena bonariensis, they will act as an insurance policy against a harsh winter, killing the parent plants. Choose side shoots without a flower head, remove most of the foliage, and then cut them down to below a node, i.e. a pair of leaves. Mix up a very free-draining gritty compost in which you can insert the cuttings. These then can be put somewhere warm in which they will root over the coming few weeks. Although most buddleias have finished their flowering, if you cut back the spent flower heads now, there's a fighting chance they may well produce some more flowers, albeit a bit smaller, over the coming few weeks. And with all deadheading, don't just take the flower heads off, but follow the stem back to a pair of leaves and cut there. If, like me, you took sage cuttings a few weeks ago, but any woody herb would work the same way, they should have rooted by now. Carefully take the rooted cuttings out of the pot and individually give them their own container with a free-draining compost mix. These can be put somewhere protected, a cold frame will be fine, to develop a good root system ready to plant out next spring. This is something which I do with some regret, because it really marks the end of summer for me. The borders here on the mound have finished most of their display. And in order to get next spring display looking at its best, I need to create room, because I want to put more bulbs in and also some biennials. I want to put many more forget-me-nots so I get that blue mist out of which the yellow tulips and the yellow daffodils can grow. And to do that, I need to cut back. Things like the Nepeta, like the hardy geraniums that have finished their flowering are now flopping and hiding the soil. But on the whole, the mound has been one of the success stories here in the garden. We extended the beds earlier in spring and they've looked really good. They've done well right up until a few weeks ago. The pears are fruiting well and I'll be harvesting those in a week or so. And up the top, around the summer house, the exotic planting has loved this summer. It may have seemed a bit grey and damp and cool to us, but not to them. Bananas, the cannas, the gingers are growing well, they're flowering, and I kept them out last winter, and I shall keep them out this winter too. But that's it for today. I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at 9 o'clock next week. So until then, bye-bye.